Welcome, everyone, to the latest edition of our On the Offense podcast. And more specific than that, welcome to the 2025 spring break edition of On the Offense, Jeff. We are recording this a few days in advance, but when we post this, it will officially be spring break. So any spring break plans? Are you going to Fort Lauderdale? Are you going down to the Gulf of whatever it's called now? What are you doing? Palm Springs?
Yeah, absolutely. No, I'm staying at our house was fairly destroyed after that pipe broke in our front room. So
you realize you just gave out your personal address to the world, right?
It was at this moment that he knew he fucked up.
Well, people could get it anyway, right? She said, I'll bleep
it. No, I'll bleep it.
All right. Well, Gelman, our producer, has just told us she will bleep that out.
But they're not going to know what's being bleeped out. I inadvertently gave my home address.
Yes.
And I don't want any of you visiting me.
Well, especially for high security, high visibility people like Jeff, we don't want to be giving the address out,
No.
Right?
I have my own security detail.
Who was the Detroit Lions coach? Do you remember that story? It was during the playoffs last year. And while he was in San Francisco playing in the NFC Championship game, so 2,000 miles from his home in Detroit, somebody posted his home address.
Yikes.
And a whole bunch of people went to his house during the game. He's in a stadium 2,000 miles away coaching. They're at his house, and his daughter was home by herself.
Oh my.
And got really scared and concerned. And his wife was at the game with him, right? And it got so bad that so many people posted the address that he had to move.
That's unbelievable.
So if Gelman hadn't agreed right here to bleep that out, you might have to move.
If you saw my house right now, you'd say that's a good idea.
Right. Well, it sounds like Jeff is homebound for spring break. I am homebound for part of it, not homebound for another part of it. That's a story for another day. But welcome to On the Offense. We hope you enjoyed our last one. The last one was when we had our first ever guest on the Offense, Smooch Repovich Rosenberg, who is one of the most esteemed, most well-known, frankly, one of the best, if not the best, recruiter that I'm aware of in corporate communications and investor relations. And I don't know, I thought that discussion was really great.
Yeah, I think it was really good. Yeah, Smooch definitely leans towards the financial side versus the pure PR. And that was very helpful to me back in the day.
Yeah, for sure. So Smooch, thank you.
Yes.
For those of you who didn't get a chance to watch that, I thought it was our best podcast yet. I think it was our 8th episode. So that makes this number 9. And so you can find that on our YouTube page or on our web page, or you can find it on any of our social channels. We posted there as well. So, and as we'll do for this. So that was the last podcast. This podcast also, like all of our podcasts, has a very specific launching pad and thus theme, and that is the fact that today, again, when we post this, March 11 is a day that will go down in infamy. 5 years ago, March 11, 2020, that was the day the world shut down. That was the day that the Centers for Disease Control and I believe the World Health Organization and others officially categorized COVID-19 as a global pandemic. And as such, that's the day, 5 years ago today, essentially, that the world began to shut down. The night before that, I can tell you where I was.
You tell them where you were, and then I'll tell you where I was.
All right. He thinks this is going to be another one of my long stories, but I'll give you the short version.
Please God, no.
The short version is that I was right here in Frisco, Texas, at the soccer stadium at the She Believes Cup, watching the U.S. play Japan. The U.S. women's national team played Japan that night, beat them. And little did we know as we sat there, not yet masked up, I don't recall, that tomorrow was going to be the day when the world was shut down. Little did we know. Where were you the night before or on the day the world shut down?
We were actually the night before, and we knew the world was going to shut down.
Yeah.
We went out to dinner for Japanese food with a close friends of ours, another couple. And the guy, Chuck, who's a close friend still, had a cold, or he thought he had a cold.
Oh, great.
And so he was sitting over there coughing. He goes,
Oh,
"No, it's no big deal. It's just a head cold." And we finished our dinner, and the next day his wife calls and, "Oh, Chuck went to the doctor and he just has a cold." And I said, "Oh, good," because I'd hate to start out the pandemic sitting with a COVID infected person.
Not a good way to start a global pandemic.
No.
Yeah.
But 2 days later, she got another call. I mean, she called us again and said, "The test was wrong. He actually has COVID."
And you probably freaked out at that point.
Oh, absolutely.
Oh my God.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So that's my start to the whole thing. And I do believe in my bag over here, I do have a mask. So if you want props, I can pull it out. But
You know what? I still carry my mask with me.
Yeah.
I do. I still have it. You just never know.
Well, Robert F. Kennedy Jr. probably wouldn't support the COVID vaccine. So
yeah. Well, here, okay. Yeah. We try to avoid politics on the offense, but it's tough on that one.
That one is tough.
Yeah. COVID's just a bad cold, right?
I know that. Yeah.
Yeah. And how many people died?
It was like over 1 million, wasn't it? Oh, look, here's a stat.
Are we getting
7 million people go? Wow. 1.2 million in the US. All right. That's even worse.
Just a bad cold, right?
Bad cold,
Yeah.
really bad cold.
Yeah. You know what? Not to ever smile or make light of it. What a horrible, horrible situation it was. COVID, it's not like COVID isn't out there still, right? But boy, oh boy, that was rough. That was rough. And it's just a terrible situation. I'm glad we're here now, 5 years later, to look back on it. I myself have had COVID 3 times, including about 6 months ago. Each of the 3 times I've had it, I didn't feel quite as bad as the first, right? The first time I had COVID, the most sick I've ever been. I couldn't believe how horribly I felt. But anyway, so the point of, the 5 years ago is really just a launching pad for today. We're here really to talk about how did COVID change the workplace, right? But even more importantly, as we look forward, because, we're all about looking forward here on the offense. How are companies today, 5 years later, handling the challenges of work from home? And/or how are they handling getting people back to the office? I mean, COVID fundamentally changed how we work. We're talking to you via Zoom, which existed before COVID,
but wasn't used.
But wasn't
like this.
What it became. Zoom to me is now almost like Kleenex, right? Which is a brand, but it's like this generic for what we're doing today. And that was all because of COVID. So, how are companies handling this? And so here we are, okay, 5 years later, here we are, March of 2025, and the pendulum has swung. 5 years ago, everybody went home, and we figured out a way to still be productive, right? And over time, people started to go back to the office, some companies more abruptly than others. But here we are, and the pendulum has completely swung the other way now. And now you've got the federal government in the United States mandating that people go back to work. I am looking here at a New York Times article from just a couple of weeks ago saying the co-founder of Google urges, this is, and I'm paraphrasing the headline in the New York Times, urges workers to the office at least every weekday.
At least
every weekday. So if you don't think the pendulum has swung way back the other way, right? Now this guy's saying, not only do we want you in the office every weekday, we want you to consider being in the office on the weekends. Now, lots of jobs are kind of like that, whatever. But now,
that would be an Elon Musk.
Yeah. Now, the Google, according to this article, the Google official return to office policy does not mandate that people go in every weekday and then on the weekends. It mandates that employees work in the office at least 3 days a week. And that seems to me, at least, to be kind of where things have settled, if you will, right? That it's depending on the company, depending on the type of work that you're doing, it's 2 days in the office, 3 days in the office, 4 days in the office. I'm seeing some companies mandate 4 days a week, but maybe you work from home on Friday. This Google comment was the first one I'd seen from a high-level company founder saying you ought to be in the office on the weekends too, right? So the question now is, are we going to let that stay? Kind of work from home most of the time, but you can work from home a little bit of the time? Or is it really going to go where the new administration wants it to go, at least for federal workers, which they can control by definition, 5 days a week, period, end of story? What do you think?
I think what we need to do is take a look, what did the pandemic show to us with regard to productivity, with regard to earnings results, with regard to, life in general. And what I saw at the time the COVID pandemic began, I was already a remote worker. There was no reason for me to go into an office. I was writing.
Good point.
I was on the phone. I was doing video calls. And I felt pretty productive like that. And I didn't waste 2 hours or 2.5 hours a day commuting. You don't get much productivity in the car aside from listening to the radio. So for me, that situation worked out pretty well. And I think if you take a look back retrospectively at all this stuff, I think for lots of people, they were pretty effective working remotely and pretty happy. And if you take a look at productivity stats going back, you could make the case that people were actually a bit more productive working remotely than working in the office because they didn't have the distractions. They could, take a trip to the restroom, to the kitchen, have a pot of coffee all the time. And so for me, I just thought working remotely made sense. And honestly, as an agency, that's what we do. We work remotely out of our homes. We meet up here occasionally and maybe at Starbucks or Hop Dottie Burgers, but
I recommend Hop Dottie for a meeting place.
I like Hop Dottie.
Yeah. With the violent exception of the boozy shakes. So if you're going to have a meeting at Hop Dottie, don't have boozy shakes during the meeting.
I've never had a boozy shake.
Don't even get me started on that.
Okay.
Yeah. All right. So I guess, so you're saying the key is, can you be productive? To what extent can you be productive at home or remotely?
Right.
You're saying in your case, at least, that you can be fully productive. We as an agency are fully productive wherever we are, right?
Yeah. Yeah. And in essence, we could live wherever we wanted to as well. I mean, if I wanted to live in Florida right now, I could be doing the same thing with you, just using this computer as a way to communicate and to see each other. But I think a lot of it has to do with what type of job you're doing. Can I get that little anecdote we talked about?
Oh, this is a good one. Good story.
Okay. So, you get all these mandates to go back into the office. And my wife was on a business trip to Washington, D.C., and she went to Phoenix.
And this is just last week, right?
Yes, last week.
Yeah.
And so with the Doge edicts and Elon Musk and Donald Trump, people were being urged to come back to the office. And because of that, in Washington, D.C., the traffic was incredible. Commuting time was twice as long. All that productivity wasted. And then they'd get to their offices and, all the wires have been pulled out and the Wi-Fi's off. So they have no way to communicate. Some people's offices were destroyed and they had to work in a conference room. So the flip side of COVID was remote work is cheaper because you don't have to worry about the facilities so much, the utilities, running a cafeteria, keeping the heat at a certain level. You don't have to do that. So, you know, from an economic perspective, for some people, that makes a lot of sense. So just my little perspective.
Okay, so you're suggesting that people in and around the Beltway sat in traffic forever.
Right.
And these are people that maybe used to sit in traffic, but then got used to not having to do so. They pony up, they get in the car, they go there and they show up and everything's been ripped out and they can't get anything done.
Yes.
That's government efficiency right there.
That is government efficiency.
Well, things really are getting better under Doge, aren't they?
Hey, Doge is what it's
We're
all
doing
about.
it. We're doing it again. We're veering into
Doge is what it's all about.
Oh, it's all about Doge these days. Oh, yeah. You know, the company I was at, Unisys, big global company, we deployed very quickly on Zoom. And not me, because I was in the corporate office. I was an office rat. I was there all the time. When you are serving at the pleasure, if you will, of the CEO, you got to be in the office. Okay. I had one of those office rat jobs. But even then, if you needed to work from home, if you had a doctor's appointment, I mean, the point is we were already used to, some more than others in our company, used to working at home sometimes and being able to be perfectly productive. And for us, we were able to continue being collaborative. I worry, you know, when we talk about, to me, it's all about, are you being productive? But it's also about, are you feeling engaged? Are you an engaged employee, right? This is something we've talked about employee engagement, I think, on these podcasts before. It is so critical to engage your employees because there is a direct line of sight from their level of engagement to their level of productivity, to their level of attachment to the company,
right?
Which then creates a direct line of sight to their level of productivity, to their efficiency and success in their role, and also to their general happiness. If that chain is broken, now they're starting to check out mentally, which I suppose would be easier to do if you weren't in an office, right? If you're in an office, you can't just take a nap for an hour, right? But, and if people are less happy, less productive, less engaged, et cetera, they're more prone to quit. And when an employee quits, for any of you out there who've tried to replace that employee, it is a boatload of time and it's a boatload of money to try and replace them. So to me, it all starts with engagement. Now, how do you engage employees when they're not there? I mean, where do we get the majority of our work information? We get it right through our screen. Right.
We all carry laptops.
Right.
My business is with me.
Yeah.
I've got my book bag here. I'll throw my laptop in, and I'm on a wireless network that I created using Apple. So I could do this from anywhere right now.
Well, you can do the job from anywhere. I will say this. I mean, we're kind of on one side, it seems like we're saying, well, as long as you have the technological capacity to stay connected, you're going to be productive. Here's where I worry. I do worry, especially for younger people who, you know, on one hand, younger people, especially those who've been in the workforce for 5 years or less, they only know work from home, remote work, at least for part of the time. And they expect that. That's just the norm for them. It's so kind of weird for those of us who were chained to our desk for decades, right? So I worry that if we are overreaching with the pendulum and forcing everybody back 5, if not more days a week in the office, the young people are going to start to lose engagement and lose productivity, even if you have them back to the office. So ironically, you can lean on them more and they're in the office more, but they may end up over time being less productive. The other side of that coin, though, I do worry about young people, and I'd love to get your view on this. I do worry that if you're newer in your career and if you're new with a certain company, if you are not in the hallway and if you're not in the company kitchen or whatever, you're not meeting people in person.
No.
And thus, I think it's going to be harder for you to build relationships with people. And again, when you're at any point of the wherever you are in a company, you have to build relationships with people. But if you're new and you're 23 and this is your first job, you need mentors. You need people to learn from. You need to be able to sit in conference rooms and learn by osmosis from a discussion, right? And if you're sitting by yourself in your pajamas and you're 24, you may be hearing stuff, but is it quite the same? I do worry about that.
Yeah, it's not quite the same. Given the hours that people work, especially in this country, that socialization process is really important. At the same time, I don't think you need to be in the office 5 days a week if your
Yeah.
job doesn't require it. If you're there 2 days a week, 1 day a week, 3 days a week, that should handle it from the socialization perspective.
Yeah.
Yeah. The other thing I'd say is back in the day, and I don't know whether you were still at EDS, but we took a look at communications. No, this was a few years after you left, and just what was most effective. And we found out it was really important to engage your employees in telling your company story. Like EDS and Unisys, they're very complex companies that did complex things that were hard to relate to if you weren't in the industry. So one thing we did is we had a storytelling program, and we said, okay, on this 3x5 index card, write down the most important thing you think that describes the company. And everyone thought what a screwy idea this is. Well, we ended up getting thousands of responses.
I love it.
And a lot of them ended up in our messaging. So if these people think, oh, wow, this company's really listening to me, they're going to have a better opinion of the company. And so I think that's something you have to balance out too. What's internal invariably goes external. And so I think if remote work could be a part of it, that, hey, I come from an atmosphere, I don't care where you do the work. It's just, do you do a good job? Do you do the work?
Yeah.
With that other component of, well, we're going to meet physically weekly, or, we're going to utilize those office facilities. But I think it all depends on what type of job you do. Obviously, you can't manufacture from home. You can't do a lot of engineering work from home.
Absolutely. So it sounds like we're kind of landing on some level of balance is best, right?
Yes.
If you're home all the time, you're never meeting anybody, you're probably not going to be fully engaged or as engaged as you might otherwise be because you're missing the social parts of it. But if you're being dragged into the office 5, if not more days per week, it may end up backfiring. So, I mean, I guess our advice to those of you out there would be careful. Be careful what you wish for. If you're going to mandate people come back 5 days a week, it may backfire on you. You may be surprised that the level of engagement goes down and thus everything else goes down except for your costs, because you're going to have to replace more people who are going to quit. It sounds like we're recommending balance.
We're recommending balance.
I had a quick comment here too. I just wanted to give you guys an extra little seed to work with. Is
Please.
From the perspective of somebody who's been in the workforce post COVID, if you will. I mean, if you right as we were understanding what COVID was, right? Call it summer of 2020. And that it wasn't going anywhere. So yeah, I think there's a big shift for people my age and younger, and even a little older, just for reference. I'm 28. I think the millennials and younger, I think are stepping more into the fact that maybe there should be this work-life balance where I don't meet all of my friends and people I hang out with on the daily at my job. There's much more of a resurgence of that third location between work, home, and this third going out, meeting people, socialization aspect that's separate from work. It's just an interesting shift to be aware of, especially too, as we're, learning the effects of how COVID is going to, affect professional corporate life moving forward. So
it's an interesting point. I mean, everything has changed.
I was going to say the same thing. Everything's changed.
Everything has changed.
Retail's changed. Going to a theater has changed.
Oh yeah.
Shopping, retail shopping. I mean, look at Amazon now compared to what it was before. And I never really, I never really shopped online that much, but now I do
Yeah.
everything online.
Exactly.
And it's a treat when we go to a movie.
Yeah.
But you can see everything at home. So I don't know. I
I
don't know
mean,
how it all
if
balances
you,
out,
if
but
you can do it at home, why not, right?
why not?
I-
Unless a pipe breaks and floods your house.
yeah, that would never happen. That
Yeah,
would
it never
happen.
could happen.
I will say this also, another piece of advice, and this is something I got out of an article in Fortune that was writing about this topic. There's tons of articles, as you can all imagine, about this right now because it's a very timely topic. Fortune did an article on what some companies are doing that focused on private sector. What some companies are doing to make it more worth their employees' while to come back to work.
Mm,
So in other words, you show up at work X number of days per week, and some companies are making that easier for you to do because there's more benefits for you when you get there. I don't think that's asking too much of companies to be a little bit more creative,
right.
especially with younger people, because again, last 5 years, it's all they know,
Yep.
right? If you're Caroline's age, 28 or younger, that's all you know. So
So you know.
look at what JP Morgan has done to entice their employees to come back with some in-office benefits. When employees register for a conference room, for example, for a meeting, their temperature preferences are included and employee coffee preferences are tracked.
I love it.
I mean,
I love it.
is that going to turn the world upside down?
No.
No, but that's kind of cool, right? But and then, well, even if companies don't quite have such wherewithal, not everybody has the money or the wherewithal to do stuff like that. But I'm sure there are some things that companies can do. And I would challenge you, if you're a head of marketing or a head of communications or a CHRO out there, try to think of some things that you can do. And I don't mean just have like a Friday donuts thing, right? Try to be a little bit more creative than that. There's all sorts of ways you can make this worth your employees' while. And you might say, why do we have to do that? We just want them back. But again, everything changed. And if you're talking
Everything
people are what, 30 or younger, nothing's changed for them. This is all
No.
this is all they know. So I have a what's that?
I said perfect example, Daddy. It ties in perfectly with what you were saying. Wonderful, the company I work for, have just announced their new evening yoga sessions in the basement of the office. That they have a little, like, it's like a gym. It's very small. It's like the size of a studio apartment, very small. But it's, with a gym floor and all of the yoga mats and everything, and it's from 5:15 to 6 o'clock. So right after you get off of work, right at
Yeah.
5, you go and change, you go downstairs and you do quote unquote rest and relaxation to end your day at the office, and then walk out with your coworkers and your friends. Beautiful.
Nice.
Genius.
Rest and relaxation.
Yes, that's always been our motto.
Yeah. Right. So the people who do that are probably much better partners by the time they get home, because they're in better mental and emotional shape when they get home than you and I ever were.
Well,
Right.
yeah, I'll give you one more example that kind of ties into that a bit, but it was way pre-COVID. I used to work in the pharmaceutical industry in New Jersey. And the way we worked during the summer was you work 4 days a week. You tack an extra half hour onto the day of each of the first 4 days. And then you get off at noon on Friday.
Summer hours.
Summer hours.
Yeah, baby.
And when you walked out the door, there'd be a hot dog cart with an ice cream cart. You'd go off with your buddies and play golf, or you'd meet your wife at the movie theater. But it was a real morale builder.
Yeah.
And the company didn't have to do that. But pretty much almost every company in that industry, in that state, did that, in that industry, which I think it made people more loyal to the company, but also I think gave them some affinity to the company. We had all kinds of stuff on campus too. We had
Oh, yeah.
a store where you could buy any of the products. We had a wide variety of products, but not just pharmaceutical, but consumer products. Everything from Entenmann's Donuts
Ooh.
to to Rolaids, to all methyleptus, to Benadryl, to Sudafed. And then on the script side, we had Lipitor and some other really big things. But we had that in a store and you could get it for pennies on the dollar. We had a medical clinic where they would even give you an x-ray. We had a dry cleaner on site. So you could pretty much do anything you needed right in the office. And that convenience factor was a big thing. And I really thought that was great. We all took advantage of it.
Yeah, and Caroline, you're right. I mean, the third leg of the stool, as you were describing a few minutes ago. I mean, yeah, you don't have to just make your friends through work. But if you have things like that, you probably are more prone if you've got, we're going to have a golf crew for summer hours.
Right. We had 4 of us. We'd play
Right.
golf on Friday.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Summer hours, by the way, this is a quick aside. That is not a West Coast thing. I don't know if you're an East Coast guy, right?
I'm an East Coast guy.
That's an East Coast thing, I'm convinced. You want to know why? Because it's always beautiful weather on the West Coast. And so this whole summer hour, let's get out Friday afternoon to enjoy the good weather. It's always good weather out there. So we never had summer
I don't
hours.
know. I've been there in June. It's gloomy.
Well, other than
wet
June,
and gloomy.
other than gray May, May gray and June gloom. That's a good point. So the key, in my view, is to be intentional, and to be intentional about engaging your employees, regardless of what your work from home policy is. So I've got 3 recommendations that I'd like to offer for an intentional approach. Are you ready for this?
I've never been more intentionally ready.
Really? Okay. Number 1 is develop an internal communications campaign designed specifically to celebrate the benefits of being in the office. So in other words, okay, great, everyone's back now, but that doesn't mean you don't have to engage them. So this could include, for example, building and promoting a set of in-person activities. People might like their home offices. They also like camaraderie, like you were just talking about, right? People like camaraderie. So be intentional with a campaign. Number 2, deploy a group of employees as culture ambassadors.
Ooh.
I thought you were going to like that. So,
Ooh.
and by the way, I am paraphrasing right now from a LinkedIn piece that I have offered that will be live on LinkedIn the day before this goes live. But as I say in the piece, I have lost track of the times that I have seen a company talk about doing stuff like this, like brand ambassadors, and then never do anything about it.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And I just think that now's a really good time for a company to think about doing something like that. Right. You are almost by definition at this point, and it all depends on the company you're at, being forced now to be in the office more than you were before, whether
Right.
you've gone from 2 to 3, 3 to 4, 4 to 5, hell, 5 to 6, whatever. People could use a little bit of cheerleading, right? And if people, you can have people physically walking around an office, you can have people who are running certain meetings about this or that, but brand ambassadors, which is such an easy thing to talk about and then frankly blow off. I think now is a great time for it as a bit of an antidote for those that don't like being there as much as they have to be there. And every company, I have to assume, has some of those people who, God, I used to be at home. Now I'm here, whatever. Right. And then the last thing is measure your progress, right? Many companies already measure employee engagement. They oftentimes it's done on kind of a preset schedule. I'm talking about measuring the campaign itself, the campaign that I'm suggesting you deploy as an engagement device. Sounds bad. As an engagement activity, right? You have to be able to quantify any campaign you do, whether it's internal focused, external focused, with some sort of measurable data, right? And so, you could set up a pre-post where you measure engagement level before the campaign, and then you measure it after the campaign's been deployed for 6 weeks or whatever. If you have a preset engagement schedule, maybe wait until that is about to be deployed maybe that's your foundation, your baseline, and then you go back in a few weeks later and measure the difference. You do stuff like that, and let's assume the data reports, people like the campaign, they are feeling more engaged than they were before. That's the kind of thing that not only can you leverage to report out to leadership, to me, there's no reason not to report that out transparently to the employee base, right? In other words, hey, everybody, we wanted to put our money where our mouth was. We realized that we've had you come back to work more or come back to the office more. Just so you know, our employees are 17% more engaged and more productive now than they were 6 months ago. But you got to be careful though. You don't want to present it as an I told you so. It's more like a rising tide lifts all boats.
Yeah.
We're so happy you're all here. Look at this great data. That shows us our model is working. Thank you for your commitment. There's all sorts of ways that you can present this in a positive way so that it's contagious and people start to get into their heads. Boy, this going back to the office thing maybe isn't so bad after all, right?
Yeah. No, that's actually, those are good points.
Yeah.
I remember in our time at EDS, we had a Celebrating Wins program.
Mm-hmm.
And if we had a big contract, mostly multi-billion-dollar contract, but we had some hundreds of millions that we would celebrate those as well. And so we would spotlight the team that brought home the contract.
The bacon.
We'd put their names up, pictures up. And if it were a contract in, let's say, Japan or China or whatever, we'd have Japanese or Chinese food in the cafeteria on that Friday, and we'd let people wear blue jeans. Do we have some questions?
Do we have questions in the chat?
We have questions for our esteemed podcast hosts, if you will.
Really?
If you will engage me.
We're
So
happy to take questions
why
from
we're
our
here.
live studio audience.
Question from the audience. You might have already answered this, but focus on the local specific. Quote, how has local marketing evolved as the world is, quote, back to normal?
What do you mean local marketing?
Yeah.
Maybe this is more small town marketing. Maybe this is small businesses. Maybe this is, not so, maybe this is businesses or entities that aren't so forward facing. For example, like Dr. Pepper, Coke, big brands that are going to bounce back and likely continue to survive through COVID. What about smaller marketing efforts? How have those evolved that to your knowledge since the world has gone back to normal?
I guess I think that's a really interesting question. To me, the way I think about it is whether you are JP Morgan Chase and you're having coffee preferences for the conference room, or you're a small business in a small town, the talent that you have in your employee base is typically the most important thing you've got going as a company. You've got to recruit the right talent. So there's two sides of that. One is, how do we recruit the best talent? The second thing is, okay, now that we have the right talent, how do we keep them engaged? How do we keep them happy, right? Now, on the first piece, I have seen a huge trend in the market of so-called recruitment marketing. That's actually a service that we offer as an agency, where we can help you build websites, microsites, if you will, all designed. The content is all designed to showcase the goodness of working for the company, the goodness of living in the community, especially if you're based not in New York City like Chase, right? In other words, there might be people who see a job posted and they think, boy, that's a great job. I wouldn't mind working for that company. But boy, do I want to live in Smithville, name the state, right?
Right.
It's a one stoplight town, or there's not a big hockey team right there. Do I really want to do this, right? And so these recruitment microsites and recruitment campaigns are all very, yes, intentional to recruit the right talent. That is something that has become more prevalent since COVID, yes. And I don't see it going anywhere anytime soon, regardless of work from home, right? But then the second thing is, how do you keep people engaged? Because even if you are in, Timbuktu, name the state, whether you're there or whether you're in Midtown Manhattan, you have to have some sort of work from home policy, right? Otherwise, people don't know where to go every day. And you do want to strike that balance, I would argue, right? But you have to keep people engaged, regardless of what kind of company you are. And I would argue that since COVID, back to the question, keeping people engaged is more critical than ever, because unlike before COVID, you now have the option to not physically be in the office. And so you got people who, there may be people who you've hired, they have all the skills, they sound great. You've never actually met them. And
That is true.
they've never actually met you, right? You think you know somebody when you've only been on Zoom calls. It's just not the same. And so how do you engage
isn't the
people like
same.
that, knowing that since COVID, more people, I shouldn't make it sound like people, like some people didn't work from home before the pandemic, but since the pandemic,
Majority of people.
more people. And again, if you're 30 years or younger, this is all you know. So the world really hasn't changed for them. This is the world. The world didn't change. If you're 28 years old, the world didn't change for you the work world didn't change for you 5 years ago, because that's what you were entering for the first time. The work world is changing now, because now, again, like we were saying earlier, that pendulum has swung all the way back, and the two of us are recommending balance. But a lot of companies right now are not practicing balance. They are putting their foot down and saying, we are done with that. We want you back in the office, period, full stop. And so I don't know if that answers your question, Caroline.
No, that's a great answer.
I have a few things I'd add to that.
Please.
Beautiful.
Small towns and communities have changed
Mm,
forever because of the pandemic.
great point.
Lots of little restaurants, lots of little boutiques weren't able to make enough money to stay in business. So a lot of them went out of business.
Such a great point.
And where people live, that's also changed. Look at vacancy rates of offices and buildings.
Yeah.
Big offices have been closed down. There's nobody to occupy them, and the cost is too prohibitive. And in this remote work world, wouldn't you like to be able to take your laptop out on a beach in Barbados and work just as effectively from there as you do from your house in Dallas? I know someone who did that, and it
Wow.
worked. So I think you've also seen things in communities where things have changed. People don't go as much to shopping malls anymore, but we've had all these communities pop up that have like a town center, outdoor activities, music, and those have replaced offices as places to socialize.
Mhm.
So I think if you kind of plan around this new mindset of our society as a whole, it works pretty well. And I think, as you said earlier, why do you want to commute in New York City? Why do you want to pay $15 each way, for your train ticket in and out of town each day? Why do you want to give up an hour and a half each way of productivity? And instead of having that, 10-hour day in the office, it doesn't work out quite like that. So, there are puts and takes.
Yeah.
But
Absolutely.
as someone who
One
works
more-
from home, I think basically it's pretty good. You just have to get
One
out.
more.
Yeah.
One more question for the two of y'all.
Yes,
What
please.
what industry will never be the same again?
Oh, that's a good one.
That is a good one.
What industry will never be the same again? Um,
Now, this could be a positive shift.
because
This
of
could-
COVID?
Yes.
COVID?
Mhm.
I mean, honestly, movie theaters.
I was going to go the same place.
I mean, and it's not just because of COVID, frankly. I don't, if I have the choice to watch the same movie sitting next to my very attractive wife in my very nice family room, or sitting next to a stranger, in a dark room who I don't know, who may have COVID or may have this or may have that, or may just chew his popcorn too loudly, I'm staying at home, right? But the other reason, and this is very negative, and we always try to stay glass half full here at On the Offense, but I've heard of one too many stories of mall shootings and theater shootings, and you're a sitting duck, and it's going to be hard to get me back. I've probably been to 2 movies in a theater since COVID.
Hmm. Wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
That's a dark answer, but that's the first thing. Second thing that came to mind was restaurants. I mean, you talked about all these restaurants in these small towns that just couldn't make it through. Just this week, for those of you based in Los Angeles, the Original Pantry announced that it's closing immediately. This is a diner downtown LA that has been there on the same corner for 100 years. 100 years, unbelievably popular, iconic, a tourist stop, closed. And the story I read basically said they never really recovered from the COVID slowdown.
I think that's going to be same for a lot of different industries. I mean, recording industry, look at that. You know, people don't go out and buy CDs anymore or records. Well, they are going out and buying records because that's sort of a retro thing. But that whole music industry,
Yeah.
you know, when you can download 2 songs you like from a new album, why are you going to go out and buy the album?
Yeah.
When you could just do it online with an MP3. So I think that changes. It's already changed. I don't think it's going back. So, you know, there are a lot of different things like that.
Yeah.
Look at the health of shopping malls, you know, it's just,
Oh, it's a nightmare.
yeah,
It's a nightmare.
yeah.
I-
So,
I will say that maybe just to close this Q&A down, I will say maybe one industry that's been helped by COVID is, I hate to say it, but ours, right? We can
Mhm.
provide you as our client perfectly good counsel and
Mm.
advice and offer as many insights from here at the University of North Texas than we can sitting in the conference room with you. You know, now that will never though preclude the importance of our getting to know you as people, and will never not be in person, right? But I'm just
Mhm.
saying we can get things done for you like this, right? So may I do a quick programming note?
yeah, let me just sing a verse. You know, you got to come and face the changes. The changes.
Turn and face the strange changes.
To quote the
Thank
great
you, thank
David
you,
Bowie.
David Bowie. Yes.
And we're here to help guide you on your change. I mean, we're the Sherpas. We're obviously the Sherpas. We're going to lead you up the mountain, and we know what you're going to encounter up there. The bumble.
Success
Oh, success. Oh, yeah, we can lead you to
and
success.
the bumble.
And the bumble.
And the bumble. So quick programming note. So as I mentioned earlier, this is being posted on March 11, which again is the 5-year anniversary of the world shutting down or beginning to shut down from COVID. Yesterday, I think I mentioned this as well. I posted our first monthly LinkedIn authored piece on this very topic on purpose. We're going to switch off, Jeff and I, month by month. So next, early in April, Jeff will post something and then we'll go from there. We hope you enjoy that content. It is meant to be thought-inducing, thought-producing, and all of this stuff, kind of like the recommendations that I suggested earlier, is all meant to be action-oriented as well, to give you things to chew on, to consider doing for your own company. And then tomorrow, the day after this posts, we are going to launch our very first Clients First newsletter. If you are on the distribution list for that, we're going to ask you to subscribe. If you're not and you're hearing it from this, we're going to ask you to consider subscribing. So just let us know. Please, you can also subscribe to this podcast on our YouTube page. And then I think ultimately we're hoping that as many of you as possible can follow us on LinkedIn. We're trying very hard as an agency to build our followers, our followership. I don't know if that's a
I think followership.
followership on LinkedIn. So if you like this content, if you liked the LinkedIn piece, if you like what's in the newsletter, and we hope you do, please subscribe, follow, and we will make it worth your while. The content we produce is always meant to add value in real time to anyone who listens. So thank you for listening. Any closing comments?
Well, just, you mentioned a couple of them, but please visit our social channels.
Good point.
We're on all of them. And we look forward to seeing you there or in person or what have you.
Yeah.
At the town center of your town.
As many started to say when COVID hit, I remember a lot of people would end conversations with "Stay well, stay healthy, be good." So stay well, stay healthy. We hope you made it through COVID. We hope you didn't lose anyone during COVID that you loved. I'm sure that all of us listening to this either had it ourselves or know people who had it.
Yeah.
Hopefully you came through it okay. It was quite a time, and there are still battles to be waged. And the work from home thing right now is we're at that stage where it's like, okay, where do we go from here? So stay well, stay healthy. See y'all later.